I'm a game design student. I'm in college for it. An unfortunate byproduct of this is that I overanalyze a lot of game design in video games. One of the things that has been on my mind recently has been Dark Drinker from Destiny 1. As you all know by now, this was turned into the legendary sword frame, the vortex frame. Same with Boltcaster, the caster frame. So if these were to come back, they would just be worse, exotic versions of the overpowered swords we already have. So, I am here to propose a solution, as well as 2 new additions to the sword trio. Before we can get into the solutions that I've crafted, I'd like to dive into their Destiny 1 counterparts, why they were likely turned into frames instead of just being brought back. So, without further ado, let's get started. While it's impossible to know for certain without speaking to the people who made these weapons, I can make a pretty solid guess as to why they were created. In Destiny 1, each class had a defining element associated with them. For Hunters, it was Arc, for Titans, it was Void, and for Warlocks, it was Solar. But they also had a missing subclass on each of them. When the Taken King was released, it came with those missing subclasses for all 3 of the Guardians. Hunters got Void, Titans got Solar, and Warlocks got Arc. So, making the exotic sword trio was likely a decision of making them work well on each subclass as well, because now you have access to all the elements. You have all 3, and you run the one that is associated with your subclass. This pattern pops up a lot in the game. So, for example, the exotic machine guns, Thunderlord, Nova Mortis, and Abaddon. And this even extends all the way into Destiny 2. The exotic trace rifles, for example? Coldheart was first, Prometheus Lens was second, Wave Splitter, while being PlayStation exclusive for a bit, was third. Arc, Solar, and Void. However, there is also a very solid chance that they were created because of the shield game back then. They probably didn't want to force endgame players to run other weapons because the shields in that strike were Solar, because, you know, back in the day with match game, that shit was crazy, you know. I think it's also pretty easy to understand why they were turned into frames. For starters, if they came back as is, they would be power crept beyond comprehension. Everyone would be mad that they just aren't as good as legendary swords. They wouldn't be as good as legendary swords, so they just made them legendary swords. I think this is a really good change for the better. Bungie has given us some really cool examples that have made the game so much better. For example, Ergo Sum? That is a randomly rolled exotic with 5 different frames. I think that's pretty cool. Don't at me though. This is a very tough question, but I think it's not as difficult to answer as it may seem. So, my new swords were designed much closer to each element. I wanted to maintain their reputation as damage dealers because that's what they did in Destiny 1. Because of the new subclass system with the elemental verbs, they can be brought back with a fresh coat of paint and they'll just fit right in. Now, it's time for the main event. But before we get started, let me just give you a word from starting with Boltcaster. Personally, I've always felt that Boltcaster has been forgotten simply because it just wasn't very good back in the day. So, I made it really good. Intrinsic. Edge of Thunder. Heavy attack to fire a beam of arc energy that creates a massive electrical storm. Increase size, duration, and damage when amplified. This is like any normal caster frame heavy attack. Caster frames hit a total of 10 times with their fully charged heavy attack. While amplified, this electrical storm would last 50% longer, which hits an extra 5 times for a total of 10 ticks. Deals 33% increased damage. So, together, this math almost equates to a 100% damage increase just for being amplified. But it gets even better. Edge perk. Electrified Edge. At max stacks of Bolt Charge, dealing damage with this weapon activates Bolt Charge. It also acts like Hungry Edge, and you can start to see where this is going. It has Swordmaster's Guard, obviously, and the exotic trait is called Chakra Breaker. Powered sword attacks jolt targets. strong against overload champions. Jolt can activate any sort of effect that it normally can on arc, blinding explosions, ionic traces, the whole shebang. And finally, the catalyst. This catalyst, I think, ties the weapon neatly in a bow. It is called Static Friction. Dealing damage with this weapon grants 1 stack of Bolt Charge. I made Bolt Charge an important part of this weapon's ideology, since we don't really have many exotics that revolve around it. Yes, this also means that every tick of your heavy attack will grant a stack of Bolt Charge. However, there would be a very, very, very small internal cooldown that prevents you from being able to unload 2 Bolt Charges on a single heavy attack. You'd be capped around 7 or 8 stacks if your first hit activates Bolt Charge. However, if you're amplified, now you can get the 2 full activations of Bolt Charge, which is insane. And that's just on 1 heavy attack. Originally, this catalyst was going to be passive Bolt Charge generation. If you held the sword while amplified, you'd get 1 stack every 4 to 5 seconds. This was shot down heavily by a friend of mine, so I changed it to what it is now. I'd argue that the new catalyst is even more busted, but who really cares? Also, I just want to mention, this is the only sword that has a custom edge perk. I did that because the exotic trait originally contained that edge perk, but it started to get really long, and, you know, I hate wordy traits. I think they should just be cut and dry, straight to the point, but, you know. Alright, moving on. Now it's time for Raze-Lighter. Raze-Lighter was known for its burst damage. I've kept that burst damage intact, and I've transitioned it over to a wave sword with a lot more solar in it. Its intrinsic is called Wave of the Phoenix. Heavy attack to ignite the ground in a wave of solar energy. Upon colliding with a major target, deal massive damage and ignite them. Strong against unstoppable champions. Adaptive swords have inherited Raze-Lighter's uppercut and don't really do anything crazy in game now, so it would be really unfair of me just to give it a high damage uppercut that you can't even spam with the changes to sword energy. It also comes with Hungry Edge for increased ammo and Swordmaster's Guard, of course. And the exotic trait is called Scorched Earth. Powered sword attacks scorch targets. Scorched and ignition kills grant cure. This kind of acts like a pseudo heal clips that you don't even really need to reload. This also includes the wave, which scorches targets too. Increased scorch with the fragment, of course. And moving on to the catalyst, which I think also neatly ties this weapon in a bow. Catalyst is called Ignition Ambition. I like the pun there. Ignitions caused by this weapon deal increased damage. 100%, which is a 2 times damage increase, and have a larger radius. Ignitions also refill sword energy. Yes, this catalyst technically allows you to spam the heavy attack, however, the energy recharge would not be instant and act a bit more like what Heal Clip is now. Also, I just want to thank Llama D2 for giving me feedback on these swords. This was one of the bigger changes that I had to it, so I really appreciate it. Thank you, Llama. Go watch his videos. He's pretty cool. And now it's time for the main event. This is the moment that you've all been waiting for. Here's what I've done to Dark Drinker. Intrinsic, Supermassive Vortex. Heavy attack to yank enemies towards you and unleash a spiral of void energy in all directions. I've always found it weird that the void sword that spins like a vortex doesn't abuse void and pulls enemies towards you. So now it does. Comes with Hungry Edge and Swordmaster's Guard. Obviously, this is a pattern. Blah, 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 whatever. Now, here is the kicker with the exotic trait. Volatile Superposition. Powered sword attacks make targets volatile. Volatile kills grant a small chunk of void overshield. So, when you heavy attack, it applies volatile and causes the targets to explode a few times. This is also strong against barrier champions. Now, this was very, very tough to balance correctly. However, I think I have it right. The catalyst makes this thing the damage monster that you knew it was, way back in Destiny 1. Catalyst is called Bane of Axis. Heavy attack deals massively increased damage while Void Overshield is active, a 125% damage increase. Attacking a large target, champions, ultras, or bosses, will consume a small portion of your Void Overshield. The small portion of your Void Overshield is about 1/8, which is the same portion you'd get from getting a volatile kill with this weapon. Originally, this was also going to weaken targets, but that might have been too insane. The additional damage while Overshield was active was also too insane to begin with, so that's why I made it eat a little bit of your Void Overshield. I really hope you like all the changes that I made to these weapons. If you didn't, let me defend myself very briefly. A key philosophy I used when designing these weapons was unbalance is balance. I want players to pick up these weapons and be like, wow, this sword does crazy damage. I want to use it. It's really important to me to maintain the identity they had in Destiny 1 as top damage picks. I think all three of them are now really solid for single target, and especially Dark Drinker, as it maintains its top spot for raid boss DPS. Of course, we won't know unless we have these in gameplay, but it's fun to think about. One thing players probably won't notice, unless they really think about it, is that these weapons are both exotic and heavy. That's a huge investment. Exotic weapons are build-defining and are typically the center of every playstyle. And yes, there's a very solid chance that the damage these swords will deal is way too much, but you know, there's always a way to balance them after they release. However, like I proposed before, unbalance is balance. These swords are no different from Finality's Augur apart from, well, the fact that they're swords. Finality's Augur is the current meta damage weapon. That is a heavy exotic, a huge investment. Same as the swords. Not to mention, they're swords. And that's another investment. You have to be comfortable running up to a boss with a sword. Not to mention, most raid bosses are crit bosses, so it's rare that you will find a raid boss that you can spam with swords unless it's Crota or, I don't know, the dude from Salvation's Edge. I'll probably have him up on screen. And now, it's time to move on to the new swords. I created these swords to fully round out the sword ideology of having one for each element. I hope you like them. Intrinsic. Big Frigid Blade. Heavy attack to slam into the ground and shatter all crystals and frozen enemies in a wide radius. Strong against overload champions. It also comes with Hungry Edge and Heavy Guard. And the exotic trait is called Cold Countermeasures. Blocking attacks with this weapon emit a freezing pulse. Higher damage attacks emit a larger pulse. It has about a 5-second cooldown on each pulse. Not to, you know, spam pulses, because, you know, that'd be pretty crazy. The catalyst is called Stasis Grave. Shattering crystals or targets at full sword energy deals heavily increased damage. 100% or 2 times extra damage. So, I built this weapon with the idea of blocking and slamming in mind. It would have a higher than normal guard resistance to make up for the fact that you need to, 1, go into enemies' faces, and 2, block. Also, the freezing pulse is similar to the Hunter's Stasis Super, Silence, and Squall, that first attack that it throws out where it freezes a large area. And the more damage you block, I have boss stomps in mind for this, the larger the pulses will be. These pulses will also be large enough to freeze an entire room if you block enough damage, which is unlikely, but it's still possible. The shattering effect heavy attack is similar to the Shadebinder's Shattering Pulse, which is the R2, M2. I think it's maybe R1 on controllers, I'm not sure. I haven't been playing on a controller in a very long time. And you can throw other stasis things in the ground, and those will get shattered too. And, of course, the shatter and freeze effects will affect anything on your stasis subclass and anything that's related to them, even on prismatic. So, the aggressive sword frame has been reasonably forgotten. It generally has a slower attack speed, so the damage for the light attacks will be buffed to maintain that damage output. Ergo some, unfortunately, did not get this treatment, and the aggressive and lightweight versions deal the same amount of damage no matter what, and this makes them inherently worse than their adaptive caster Vortex Wave versions. A reason for this might be because they're all one exotic, but because these swords are all unique exotics, they will not have this problem. Lightweights, right? I mentioned that sword frame. I wonder if there's a reason for that. There is a reason. Intrinsic. Fabric Tear. Heavy attack to unleash a wave of strand energy that deals significant damage and unravels targets. Strong against barrier champions. I'm sure you have an image of what this looks like in your head already, but let me narrow that down for you. The lightweight frame's heavy attack is more lunge than it is slash. Think of it like the beam that the Master Sword has from Breath of the Wild when you're at full health. It doesn't spin, but the range is about 8 to 9 meters. I'm pretty sure with gameplay it would be tuned to make a bit more sense, so, you know, just imagine it tuned and make sense to whatever comes up in your head. It has both Hungry Edge and Swordmaster's Guard, and the trait is called Severing Blade. Hitting a large target with Fabric Tear will stun them, champions, ultras, bosses, etc. Action, I don't know what button this would be, it would probably just be your finisher button, to follow up with an execution that deals massive damage and emits a Severing Burst. So, execution. That's interesting. Execution is a pseudo-strand verb. It's effectively a finisher, but for targets that can't be finished. However, you can perform an execution on a target as long as they have the debuff. They don't have to be at low health. And now you're thinking, wait a minute, I can just instantly kill a target at whatever health as long as I debuff them? No, this won't instantly kill them, but it will do a big chunk of their health no matter what. You can do this on champions, even though those are technically finishable. But, you know, why not, right? Champions are big targets, so. Also, execution is accompanied with a custom animation for the sword. It puts you into the finisher camera, and you perform a Jetstream Sam-like attack. By the way, this sword is a strand katana. How cool is that? The catalyst is called Super Asymmetry. Kills with Severing Blade and Fabric Tear will now grant Woven Mail. A nice little addition of survivability to this sword. I'm not sure how much Woven Mail it would grant, definitely not game breaking, but enough to encourage you to play aggressively in higher end content with a sword. Because, you know, this is a sword, also it's a lightweight, so you're going to be zooming around the battlefield, you know. Also, I would like to mention that this sword has gone through so many changes. This strand sword has literally been the bane of my existence for the past, I don't know, week and a half. First, it put you into the weave from Weave Walk. People apparently hated that, but some people thought it was really cool. And then it also spawned Threadlings at some point. Yeah, I don't really know what I was cooking with that, but yeah, this sword is. I hope you like where it is now, but if you don't, then feel free to leave me extra feedback. And that's it. That's how I'd bring back this classic sword trio, and of course round them out with the 2 new dark elements, Stasis and Strand. Feedback is really important to me, so let me know what you guys think about them in the comments below. Also, feel free to let me know if you want more of these concept redesigns. I have a lot of them. Exotic weapons, exotic armor, even as far as new supers, aspects, and a new subclass entirely. Just sitting in my archive of ideas. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.